Okay, so you said something really fascinating about himself, and you will never say it again. You heard it here. Please, Rachel.
Hi, yes, I'm Rachel. I recognize this half of the room, but not that half of the room, so nice to meet you guys. I'm an AME PhD student, PhD in Media Arts and Sciences. This is my second semester, so first year. I work under Robert, who runs the Meteor Studio, which is actually where we are right now. I am, like, my background is actually totally different. I have a background in meteorology. I broadcast at news stations for about a decade and then started teaching the intro to meteorology class for ASU online. And then through that got paired with Robert, and I really love teaching, and I'm actually hoping at the end of all of this to be a teaching professor. So I need my PhD. And I'm turning, the VR project we're building is a virtual reality lab for my intro to meteorology students. So they're going through a 3-act hurricane experience, watching a storm develop and then hit the coast of Florida. And it's really interactive and it's all the learning objectives. So yeah, great. That's kind of where I am, working on my first submission for a conference paper and starting that process. So.
Great. I'm hoping that in the course of the semester, we'll have a chance for people to show some work, talk about their work. Great. Please.
My name is Alex. I'm actually studying emerging technologies, and in general, my huge interest really to my huge interest really to military and politics. I'm actually working on an actual thing where I'm actually going to be going to Ukraine and actually getting some footage from what's going on there and projecting it. So.
Are you actually thinking you're going to Ukraine?
I want to, but I need to present my idea and see if ASU will fund it. It's going to be somewhat expensive, and I'm not going to say too dangerous, but depending on where I go in Ukraine, it's going to be a little dangerous.
Okay. It's interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. My name is Morgan. I'm actually a undergraduate student. I took a class within AME last semester and really enjoyed it. So I emailed you and asked if I could get special approval to be in this class. So, but I have a lot of respect for all the work that you guys do as graduate students and admire it. I'm specifically in ASU's Global Studies and Philosophy programs. Within global studies, my focus is primarily on regulatory policy and how that interacts with globalization, specifically in technology and intellectual property laws. And then within philosophy, my area of focus is philosophy of science. So, yep, that's all about me.
Cool, great. Oh, and you mentioned since you're graduating soon, you're also working in a law office right now?
Oh yeah, I'm a pre-law student, if you will. So I clerk for a firm part-time and do discovery stuff, and would love to be in AI law eventually.
Okay,
so,
great.
Yeah.
Interesting. Great.
My name is Cameron. I'm technically an undergraduate as well.
Yay.
But I'm sort of pretending to be a PhD student. I'm working with a professor in the School of Complex Adaptive Systems on major transitions in evolution and how transitions in biological organization applies also to human social systems, and how we could offer or generate principles of transition and suggest how the world could transition to something more sustainable is kind of the core question. I took with this half of the room, we were all in Xin Wei's AME course last semester, and a lot of the topics we touched were very fascinating. And I just wanted to continue a lot of the threads we opened up, and it seemed like there is a lot of threads that are continuing. Yeah.
Can I ask the professor in complex?
Manfred Ludwig.
Oh, okay. I'm friends with those PhD students.
Which one?
Nicole. Interesting. I'll
talk about it. My name's Laya. I took AME, whatever course number last semester. I'm a second year PhD student in the School for the Future of Innovation and Society in their program, Human and Social Dimensions of Science and Technology. So technology and society is the short of it. And my research is heading in a direction of thinking about what data sovereignty looks like and means in health justice spaces, and specifically interested in studying health spaces that have done kind of autonomous organizing for health, and seeing kind of how that applies to data and emerging digital technologies. Very interested in futures methods, which is part of what brought me to the course last semester to begin with. And I think last semester I started getting particularly interested in how issues of data sovereignty overlap with environmental issues. And so the way that data storage is a massive environmental drain. And interested in thinking about those threads. And I have to be fully honest, I'm not 100% committed to this yet, because I'm taking way too many things for my own good right now, but I really want to be here. And so I'm trying to find a way to work that out. So
great.
Yeah.
Great. And Tanya, please
Yes.
introduce yourself.
Can you still hear me well?
I think so. Yeah. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. My name's Tanya. I also was in Dr. Shah's class last semester with several of you. I'm in the master's program of complex adaptive system science. I came to that I got my bachelor's in GIS in 21. And I did a minor in statistics and urban planning. From there, I went to work for a summer with NASA on a peat island project. And I've done some other projects in planning Safe Routes to Schools project here in Columbus. And I currently work in OSU's College of Public Health. My interest has been really evolving very recently. So I'm very much looking for ways to understand how a lot of policy work is siloed, and how we can move into a more interconnected way of thinking about how we're doing planning. Especially, I was in the public health arena. I think of it more as community wellness. So I have a lot of interest in trees and bikes and transit and all these things, but I'm really wanting to explore how to integrate those concepts so that we, as people who are working in policy and planning, are taking a whole systems perspective on those things. So I'm really interested in thinking about applying evolution, the methods that we use to investigate evolution adaptation, to some of that policy work. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
So I want to credit who were in the seminar last semester. Again, to be clear, I mean, there's no formal dependence on that seminar either, but the conversations that were, I encouraged a lot of crosstalk, and I felt the conversations that were held by people in that course, especially guys who were here, were really rich. And I thought, you know what, the rich stuff, I think, to merit continuation. Just to explore deeper, and also to explore them live, because I think things stick better, at least for me. I hear people talking about it as well as reading them afterward, So that's one thing. And the other, I have great respect for people's backgrounds here. I think that the backgrounds are rich enough that maybe we can be a little bit ambitious beyond the academic part, which is, what you've learned this semester in this course. It's, in other words, thinking forward to connecting maybe some of the conversations with what's going on outside the academy, right? Out there, I mean, you already are working outside the academic context anyway. So let's see, I mean, what happens, what would happen. It's also in the spirit of wicked problems. If you want to address, real issues, just like you guys are mentioning, it doesn't make sense to address them discipline by discipline anyway, right? Sure, particular programs, you have particular degrees, that's fine. But, given your programs, I think the way you pursue your programs, you're already going to be involved with what used to be called, like, different kinds of constituencies and situations that are quite, have to be addressed holistically, have to be, okay? So that's one. Another point is, I mentioned to some of you that the Synthesis Center that I'm the director of, it has already been doing for about 10 years, different kinds of work that's both research-oriented, art-oriented, but also in the past 5 years, connecting up with agencies outside the academic context, like NGOs, United Nations, etc. And frankly, there's a lot of conversation there. I think that we really enriched by what you're doing. It needs new networking, new ideas, new people. That's one thing. So I think that's really exciting, and we'll see if that can be worked out. So along the way, I'm going to be introducing references to organizations and conversations, and if you're interested, pursue them. That'd be really great. Okay, and vice versa. So now, sorry to repeat, but I'll say a little bit about myself. So my background is in mathematics. I was trained in mathematics. My degrees were in mathematics, but I was pure mathematics. Okay. And then along the way, I was thinking, well, why were computers so useless for mathematicians? But this is useless for mathematicians, but also useless for my friends who are in literature and poetry and performance and theater. Okay, so along the way, I was thinking, well, is it because mathematicians are poor? CS people have more money because they have gear and all that, or it's because it's just really old-fashioned, they don't know how to think in terms of computing, or the more fundamental reasons. So that's one. Another is maybe the way the computers were designed to be used could be designed differently. There may be other ways to use machines, algorithms to be more precise, algorithmic technologies and digital representations in ways that are not just reducing to basic databases, or even AI thinks these are really very, very elaborate ways of working with databases of some sort, or the other billion categories. So I think both have now shown to be fruitful. First, maybe understand maybe some fundamental limits on what technologies, algorithmic technologies can do, and also maybe look for alternatives. So that's what Synthesis Center has been doing. And before that, the Topological Media Lab. So that's before I came here. That was in Montreal, in Canada, and that's still going on. It's more art-oriented, where Synthesis Center is more oriented toward applications to let's say design, architecture, and things like that. Okay. So that's I was also director of the School of Arts Media Engineering when I came to ASU. And I was able to do my service, and now I'm pretty fully occupied with research and teaching. I'm trying to really go out there. So that's that structure. In this is a week, once a week, intensive once a week seminar. So it doesn't take that many slots, which is good. I propose to alternate between in-person meetings and meetings in Zoom. I've done this before, where with small groups like this, we can meet together, all of us together, and synchronously. Okay, that means Tanya synchronously. Okay, not necessarily on this. Oh, Tanya's in Ohio, by the way. Okay, synchronously once every other week, and then in the alternate weeks, I would just meet one-on-one with you in Zoom. So that way, have a nice conversation. We are more focused on each of you. Okay, so that gives a lot of flexibility. So I'll actually formalize this as an actual calendar with schedules and things like that. And so the alternate week, of course, ideally we use the same time slot, but if not, I can work with you. Okay, and the point of that is so that we can really run it as an advanced graduate seminar, which means that we can maybe thin the syllabus out. This is packed. Okay, what we can do is, based on what I'm hearing from you, what we can do is go make it past through this, see what really speaks to us, speaks to you, and then maybe make sure we carve out space so that you can each have a turn presenting something that you'd like to present. It could be based on the readings, on a particular reading, or it can be based on something in relation to your own work. Okay, so that, like, I think it would be really interesting to hear from you, whether it's something you've done in another course, or something you've written about, or some project you're doing. I think that's all very interesting, and that way it would be more like at the end of the term, I'm thinking that we can have something like a miniature conference. Yeah, and that's been really great for graduate students. We come together and give at the end of the semester a maybe 15-minute talk about some project, some topic. So that's also gives some professional practice in presenting yourselves in that kind of format, and have a really rich discussion so that we can actually work with each other and have a conversation with each other. I think, and that will be accompanied by some short paper. Okay. The format can vary. I mean, my idea is that whatever you write here should be something that will be useful for you. So, you know, it could be something that maybe is already going to be part of the preparation for comp, or writing something you might want to publish, or at least keep it in your pocket for something in the future. All right. So something like that. Any suggestions or comments so far before we go to? Also, these are long sessions, so we can actually have good breaks. I think what I'll do for now is I can roll right through into the syllabus and walk through them, the topics, and give you some idea of the kind of the arc of the course. All right. So why don't I put this on the screen so that Tanya can see as well the revised syllabus. I've been working on it. So here, I'm going to zoom it out a little bit here. You know what? I think I just shared this. Tanya's going to share just the document itself. So here it is. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go. I can see it better. So, okay. First, let me just say overall what I'm thinking about with this. This is one topic that we had last semester that I think maybe be thought of as kind of the spirit for this seminar, which is moving from technologies of representation to technologies of performance. So we'll spend some time after break to have people speak to that. You know, what do we mean by performance? What do we mean by representation? And what kinds of representations there are? Okay, but for now, just take a colloquial representation of how to represent something in words or diagrams, and equations, whatever, mathematical or qualitative. So there's a lot of scientific techniques for doing that. There's also literary techniques, artistic techniques for making representation. About that, right? Different kinds of techniques. So, but the critical move that I want to make is to see if we can move. I think of these same techniques, some of the same techniques, as technologies for making changes in the world. So, you know, I could take this projector. What's it? Oh, that's a screen. It's not a projector. I want to forget that. I could take, if I had a projector, I could take a projector and shine it on the wall and make an image appear on the wall. Okay, or I could take the same projector and tilt it down or somewhere else, and it becomes a source of illumination. It's a source of light, a very expensive light, but it's a light. Okay, so if you work in theater, for example, then it's just another mode of structuring light, and you can shine it on various objects. Not as good as the theatrical light, but it is a source of illumination. Completely different way of thinking about technology. Okay, not a technology to make images appear, put an image on a wall, but the technology to make some objects real objects more visible than others. Okay, so that's one example. Okay, and a lot of technologies can be used that way, but most of them are going to be used in media technology used for representation. Right. So I like to think more carefully about what we mean by representation, and then in a higher level way, there's this true also for scientific work, and this is what I want to show. I'll show in a minute. Okay. So that's why the first unit is about different kinds of representations, representing people, representing, this is the second bullet, representing people in terms of their psychology, their behavior, And then understanding that paper is a very important paper. In fact, it's a very famous paper, Sociology and Psychology, the paper by Heinrich and Heine. These are called the weirdest people in the world paper. It's become really famous now. It's a paper that does this kind of cited study of people's social choice behavior, normative behavior, even perceptual behavior, like those optical illusions, and then showing how they differ according to culture. So it's really amazing study, actually. So a very important one. And the word weird stands for white, educated, can't remember what the I is for, people living in rich democracies. So basically graduate students, students in American universities. No, they were being facetious. But on the psych research, it's actually based on a very small sample set, very narrow sample set. That's part of the critique. And then making claims about human nature. The third bullet, David Donahoe, is another very important paper about statistical science. So, we hear about data science and data mining and big data techniques, but this is one of the most important statisticians alive, actually, David Donahoe, I think he's at Stanford. There was this really big survey of the state of the art in statistics and kind of the good uses and problematic uses of statistics. And I just want to point one section on that paper, which talks about an amazing set of studies about medical research, which shows a lot of that kind of work is not reproducible. Even the research you read in JAMA and Science and Nature, a lot of that is not reproducible. Meaning, what it means rigorously is that if you choose different protocols for analyzing the data, you get different and sometimes even opposite results. It's amazing. So stuff like that. So it points out this. We need to be much more careful when talking about data. So there's that. And the first bullet, we can get to later on, also is about more fundamentally the notion of category. We actually try to divvy up the world, partition to thinking about categories. And you guys who are in the semester in this other course, maybe you should remind me which ones we looked at before, if it appears in the list. Okay. And we'll decide what to do. So anyone who says supplement means we're not going to read it. It's just for background. Okay. I mean, we don't have to discuss it, but it's in the background. If somebody is interested in it, we can go on with it. Okay. So that's kind of like an overview, a different, just very, very scattered, a few types of representations we can look at critically. And then the second unit, and that probably should take 2 weeks. Okay, 1.5, 2 weeks. Okay. The second unit is really going more fundamentally into language itself. You say, well, we think in words, we think with language, right? And this is a fundamental observation, right? That if you think about something, you're thinking about it in the language, whether it's Chinese or French or English or whatever, So how does that affect your what you can do, what you can think? So the readings here have to do with basically how we think language works. Okay, and usually I used to start with this Wittgenstein because it's kind of fundamental, but I thought maybe we'd ease into it. But it really is very fundamental. What Wittgenstein wrote about language. So it's kind of foundational, kind of clears the ground, I think, for a lot of thinking. Whereas the other articles, like David Morris, is a very short one. It's like 2,000 words. It's a very, very concise observation about how people attribute more power to words, as if words are beings, are thinking entities, than just marks on paper. Okay. And it has very strong effects even with today's large language models and generative AI. Okay, the way that they're interpreted. So interesting things there. So that's language, second unit. I'd like to also give some time to thinking about experience, what people call experience. So we can say we can step back from something and just look at the situation and talk about it, but we could also be thrown into the flow of things. Like if you're, it's the difference between, let's say, watching a soccer match on TV or on video or playing soccer, right? So there's kind of difference, the difference between watching somebody else do something versus doing it yourself. Okay, so whatever that is, and there's a very important, very clear writer, William James, American psychologist and philosopher, who wrote about what people call behavioral radical empiricism, which is kind of this thing about, let's look at what experience is first before we start making up some abstractions. Okay, like he says, even consciousness itself is an abstraction. It's not an abstraction. So in the same spirit, embodiment comes up. So let me just pause here for a moment before we go further with any particular things that catch your eye so far. I've seen some of these movements before. Has anyone seen any of these movements before? Okay.
Maybe we read your work on this last one.
The voices one?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
There's also,
This one we read as well.
I can't remember if it was that one or if we read two others by David Morris. Maybe it was that one.
Most likely, I'll have to read it again to understand it anyways.
Oh, I'll tell you, I've been seeing it like many times. Many times.
The language section sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
yeah, we read Arrow and the impossibility theorem as well last.
What,
semester.
Tanya?
We read
Say-
Arrow and the Arrow and the impossibility theorem. We read that last semester as well.
Oh, but speaking of that, there are some pretty charged articles in this list. For example, that one, which is a supplemental, it was kind of a supplement. So people talk like, especially this year, about voting, right? It turns out there's a basic theorem. It's an amazing theorem that basically says, under very general conditions, to say no dictator, every person's vote counts the same as everybody else's vote. The way a certain group of people vote, if they vote together, is, and there's another group of people who vote a different way, have different rankings. These two groups have different rankings, the preference in terms of preference rankings. So if there are different rankings, and these people can be permuted and it doesn't change. Very basic assumptions like this. There is no voting mechanism. There's no voting mechanism that satisfies these very general, basic characteristics, which is an amazing theorem. It was proven not that long ago by a very important economist named Carroll. So maybe all this debate about what is parliamentary democracy, direct democracy, direct voting, whatever it's going to be, none of these techniques or quadratic voting for that matter, none of these techniques, formal techniques will guarantee that people will fairly get what they want collectively. So this is a very serious negative theorem, which means that we have to work harder. I think about how to decide what we want to do together collectively. Which is what I want to get to in this whole semester. Okay, say, okay, so given the problems with language, problems with representation, problems with voting, problems with algorithmic, these are all very strong constraints. They're not deeper than maybe the people who pervade these solutions for us would like us to think. And yet, what do we do? How can we actually work together and build systems that will work for us? Okay, so that's at toward the end. Okay, another unit is question of embodiment. Is what difference does it make to have a body? So people talk about social media and VR and all this kind of stuff. The mixed center, right? Extended reality here, and anything to do with the screen, right? this is what we say, if we look at this, if we mediate the world through the screen, then usually I'm sitting down, right? So I have maybe my fingers on the keyboard and something like that. But usually I don't use most of my body. I really don't. I don't walk and jump and roll, anything like that. I don't have to, shake hands with the people all the time. I basically just focus on the screen. Okay, I'm a sessile body. So really, if people say, well, you're still in the body, so what difference does it make? There's brain, the limit case is the brain in the vat. What used to be called brain in the vat, right? Or the limit case might be what the extropians would say, just upload us. Common trope, right? So I'd like to really look at some very careful thinkers, in this case, Merleau-Ponty, who wrote very, very subtly about embodiment. Not the same thing as having hands and feet, okay, something else, okay? Like a sense of space or a sense of rhythm, a sense of time, a sense of being a sexed body, okay? There's different kinds of senses that were having a body makes a difference, or having a kind of body makes a difference. Okay. We can talk more about that. But I think that's really key to return to that. And then we start turning toward, technology. Okay. So when we look at, especially this next section on tools and instruments. Remember, I was saying that I want to have this general arc about moving from technologies of representation to technologies where we use technologies to make a change in the world, okay? Whether it's social change or material change or symbolic change, what does that mean, So there's some different levels at which scales at which we can think about that. One would be at the scale of the individual instrument, like a hammer, or a pen, or well, not a pen, say a hammer or a chisel, something like that. Another could be the level of software. This is Thor Magnusson, the next topic there, writing about, in this case, he's using this example, electronic musical instruments, which is a big deal at AME actually, which are bodies performing music using electronics, right? This kind of thing. But then the biggest scale would be a very important guy, Gilbert Simondon, who's one of the most important philosophers of technology in the 21st century. Who wrote about ensembles, technical ensembles, meaning technical objects like devices and machines, technical individuals, people who know something about how these machines work, and then ensembles, putting them together to work in the loop. Okay. So I'll say a little bit more about that when I want to talk about some projects I've been involved with at Global Futures. I'll use that as an example to work. So when thinking about how these kind of ensembles really could be thought of together. So one example I use is the driver in the car. So with Tesla, for example, whatever the self-driving car project, right, would be to completely automate the car so that it drives itself and you're just sitting in it passively, right? But what's interesting to observe is that we've had 100 years of evolution to now have these very finely tuned bodies in lumps of steel and glass that are very well tightly coupled together. So drivers are trained to manipulate the controls of the car, and cars have electronics in them to modulate what the human intentions are to successfully drive down these very indeterminate situations called streets, right? So it's already a technical ensemble. So why cut humans out of the loop? They're part of the machine, part of the technical ensemble. Something to think about when talking about design of technical systems. And speaking of systems, takes us to 6, which is if we want to think about things systemically. I'm wearing now my complex adaptive systems hat. Okay, you can also tack it over the other screen too. Complex adaptive systems hat. So if we want to take this kind of systemic look at any situation, then including technologies of articulation and technical ensembles, maybe we can, first kind of the approach is to take a little step back. Well, look at the existing systems that we have, meaning technologies, ecosystems. How did they keep on persisting? They've been persisting for millions of years, sometimes hundreds of millions of years. So I think we can learn something from them, right? Can't we? So that's why, for example, maybe the third item, number 6, and number 6 is very important from Booksko. So he's probably one of the first in the West ecologists. He really wrote profoundly about taking ecological approach to looking at animal and human behavior. So, and it's really amazing what he writes about the, did we read Booksko last semester? No, okay, great, something flashed. Okay, so, because he wrote amazingly about the interdependent relation between, for example, like a tick hanging off the branch and a warm body, a furry dog, you know, and basically its sensorium is nothing at all like my sensorium. It's nothing like, it doesn't see dog, first of all. It detects gradients of heat, but doesn't know about dog. It doesn't exist for a tick. It has chemical sensing, but doesn't identify as an object. Things like that. Okay? Interesting to think about. So it's not only is the sensorium of different animals different than my sensorium, its ontology is different from my ontology. So it gives us pause to think about things. And then beginning to put it all together, we would put together these kind of technologies in a systemic way to think about how they can be used collectively. So not just an individual, but collectives of people, and not just using one device at a time, but using ensembles of devices. To understand that situation is why I go to theater. Because in theaters where we have all these different kinds of techniques for shaping the environment, lighting, the sound, costumes, furniture, etc., right? And the arts of the body, how bodies are choreographed together, and how attention is directed, and language too, you know, is used in a very refined way. It all comes together to make heightened events that are charged with symbolic meaning, more than just the everyday we don't pay attention. And there's this multi-millennia art in different cultures of taking a situation and charging it so that it becomes far more meaningful and practical than just an unmarked event. Okay, so there's a deep craft that's done in theater, but most of it's basically inside theater. And it's just you have to be a theater person to know how it works, right? So I've been for 10 years unpacking it and learning from it and seeing how can we learn from that kind of very complex collective technique, body of techniques and technologies to deploy some of them in other parts of the world too, like in architecture. So that's looking at performance technologies as a source of inspiration. And then I've been reading recently a book by Isabel Stenger. It's called Making Things in Common, which I probably mentioned in this other seminar. But she has been looking at different kinds of assemblies of people, some for scientific purposes to establish a fact, the speed of light, or how far the moon is from the planet Earth, etc. Scientific facts, how they are assembled and determined. In comparison with what she calls generative assemblies, these are assemblies of people, experts, policymakers, resource people, and most importantly, constituencies, meaning people who have to live with the results of the deliberation or the policy. How such groups of people can come together and decide what is to be done. Okay, and this is kind of the fundamental wicked problem that Gary Dirks at ASU has mentioned before. I learned from is the mother of all wicked problems. Is that people around the table might say, well, let's work together, okay? And we have goodwill to work together, but if people don't have a common value framework, then people can rationally disagree what is to be done with goodwill and rationally, but following different value frameworks will disagree what is to be done. So this is a fundamental challenge. And so ever since he mentioned this about that, ever since I heard this from him about, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, I've been thinking about this. So how can we do this? So we can't assume, we shouldn't assume, I think. Personally now, I don't think we should assume it's a common epistemic framework that if only people all were educated, if only people all knew enough physics, if only people knew enough economics, we could then get going. You know, if only we all were all equally literate in English, great. You know, to have a common language, a common vocabulary, or if only we had the right technology to make decisions. Oh, you know, if only, right? These kinds of things. So I've been thinking about that. I think there are some things I hear from your projects, some of your projects, really promising possibilities, or at least test cases. You know, like things you might want to achieve. Well, let's put them on the table. Talk about, let's say, well, let's say people talking about health. What constitutes health for? This is from an actual case. Health for farmers in South India. The farmers in South India, in terms of clean water, is very different from the people who live in cities in South India for clean water. And then, you know, who do you address? How do you address these? Okay. Which is very different yet again from the people who are trying to build the cities to withstand flooding every year. They used to occur only once every 100 years. So it's a project that's being done there. It's, okay. It's all part of the water problem. You know? So it's a very big deal there. Yeah, so in a sense, it ends with questions that I hope that maybe some of you or all of you are interested in walking with me on, like that one that you said. You know, this question of, you know, because not necessarily a calculus. That is, we can't necessarily, even, you know, with computers or without computers, calculate what would be the optimal solution. You know, the engineering approach would be say, well, let's do the 80%. Let's make a solution which satisfies 80% of the people, or whatever. Then we're done. But okay, now I talked too much, but just wanted to go through everything. So I'm going to go back and maybe people can have some questions or comments. Maybe now's a good place to ask for something to maybe elevate, because then we can make space. We can say, we can maybe emphasize some particular things that you find more interesting. Or what's going on. You know what? I'm going to email this to you, Tanya. Just give me a chance to email just while we're waiting. Because what I'm thinking is that we could perhaps even just take half of these topics or subtopics and leave plenty of space then for discussion and bringing in, you know, particular projects. That's what I would like to try. Okay, here's this. This is just like a menu of what we don't have to eat. So.
Any food allergies?
That's a good way. Yeah. Well, my wife is gluten intolerant and she doesn't drink milk, and recently she stopped drinking alcohol. So no more pasta.
Oh no.
And it was hard Christmas because, you know, we had all these family here and everybody else was eating cake and everything. So she just sitting there looking at them.
That's so sad.
You know, gluten-free cake is not as tasty.
They try.
They're trying.
Whole Foods has a good one, but it's like this big.
I'm gonna go to Whole Foods this
Yeah,
time.
it's really good. And it's vegan, so
Yeah.
gluten-free and vegan.
And we tried Beyond Meat, which is kind of, oh, I don't know, you know, I don't know.
Well, I really like the idea of the specifically language and embodiment sections,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
the performance as experiential.
let's put some marks here.
Experiential.
Let's put some marks here.
Yeah, I would say for me, the experience and then like seeing here where it says for discussion to explain in your terms how learning happens, like as someone building an educational experience and wanting to definitely different learning needs, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, good, good mark. Yeah. It's on page 2. It's on page 2.
Yeah, I like the sections where it's very heavy on philosophy. So
What, like where?
like you have like language, experience, embodiments. And then I like we have Deleuze and Guattari at the end as well.
And by the way, this is a small group, so therefore we can be in specialized, like speak to things that they do you, and then other people carry loads and loads.
Yeah, we read 1,000 lessons
Was it an Adams course?
in Adam's course. That was
That's a trip.
That was a lot. That was a lot for me.
You need something to read it for sound. That's what they said. In the just read it as jazz. Yeah.
Just read it as
Read it for
Read
sound.
it
Read
as
it for sound.
jazz.
No, I mean, that's just to, remove some fear. No, it's fun. You can read it for sound. And then you can read it for sense.
well, you can read the original French for the sound.
That's right, for the sound. Yeah.
I tend to lean away from the philosophy heavy wings.
So we have a common interest. We want that.
Yeah.
We want
That's
that.
weird.
We want that. We want that. We need that.
Although the ones on embodiment, I didn't mention I dance professionally also and have been dancing for a while, teach dance, and so embodiment is like, it's like around me all the time, and like as far as health and data, it's something I'm also very interested in thinking about, like bodily autonomy in those spaces, so I feel like embodiment comes into play very often. And then the first one, all the critique, like the first week, or the first like representation section, all the critiques are really interesting to me.
Like the weird people went to weird.
Yeah, that one, and also the supplements on criminality. And yeah, I tend to be very, very critical of technologies that are carceral in any nature. So I feel like those are always really interesting critiques for me.
Sorry, are these Chinese academics like in China or?
Yeah, they have to be Chinese computer scientists.
In China.
In China.
Interesting.
I just cherry picking.
Yeah.
You find that everywhere. Yeah.
Like, that's interesting. Sorry.
No, I mean, that's also I feel like it's a very different thing to say that in the US versus in different contexts, and so that's always interesting to me.
Right.
And then the final week on politics and generative assemblies is also super interesting to me.
Yeah.
So that's something I think about in the context of data sovereignty a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm specifically interested in how collectives make decisions together and where the boundaries of a collective are.
And you want some ideas from your experience. I mean, that's what I'm looking for, also examples of certain.
Yeah.
communities.
That I feel like I'm like acquiring examples as I go along with my
We hear
research too.
more examples.
I think, like you, Leah, I'm really interested in the embodiment piece, but one of the things I was thinking both about embodiment and collective decision making, and something I think about a lot, it comes up in my mind quite often is the idea of, we've laid down, we lay down paths, we lay down sidewalks, we decide where people should go, and we put paths down for them. But if you didn't do that, they would figure it out for themselves, and they would make paths, and that is a way of, you don't have to ask people where you should put a sidewalk in, because they'll show you where to put it in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that is a form of collective decision making, right? So that's just something that comes. I was thinking about that also as an embodiment of knowledge, right?
Very interesting. That brings up this issue about planning, right? do we need to, not we, do institutions need to, let's say futures, okay? Does that mean institutions should plan ahead, like try to do a horizon scan, see what's coming on the horizon, and then prepare itself and then to actually implement some, some constructions that would anticipate that, right? So I'm using words that are kind of loaded, we say anticipate futures versus plan, they're not the same, right? Because people who do anticipation say that it's not planning. We anticipate possibilities, but we can't plan because we don't actually know. We only know what happened after it's happened, which has to do with kind of path example that Tony was talking about. But also, if we don't prepare, then maybe even after you see people laying out these paths in the grass, we don't have the means to follow up, right? So there's something about that. Right? Yeah.
I mean, knowing that their paths will develop, you can prepare and then, but leaving it loose, letting people show you where they're going and where they want to go, and then saying, oh, now we need a path here so people aren't walking in the mud, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. From theater, there's this idea, Peter Brook was one of the people here, wrote about when he was a young director, that he was suddenly given the opportunity to step in because the main director got sick or something. And he was just whatever, had never done this before, okay? So he was terrified, and he did all these drawings and planning, what the actors will be doing, exactly how to block them, how to stage and everything like that. And then before he went to the first rehearsal, he threw it away. He threw all his notes away, and then he walked in, and then it worked out. And he said that if I didn't do all that preparation, I would not be able to stand in front of them and tell them what I wanted. But I had to also put it away because if they just came on and say, you do this and this and this, they would think I'm a fool, right? I don't know what I'm doing. So that people say that planning is perhaps necessary, but not sufficient. Right? Or rehearsal might be necessary, but that's not the same thing. You don't just perform a repeating rehearsal. We do need to do the rehearsals. Anyway, so there's something to that, I think. So, but I think coming from music and theater is quite interesting, from musical performance practice and from theater practice. Okay, but it's really not the same thing when we have fiduciary responsibilities. Is what I'm told, because you're working in an NGO, right, or you're working in an art organization, you have sponsors that give you money, and you need to tell them what you're going to spend the money on, and you cannot deviate, right? Very much. Right. It's a big issue. Okay. Here's what I'll do. I will speak today about, give some words about the next readings to come. And then after that, maybe other people can speak up. That is, maybe one or two of you can take that subsequent topic, right? And prepare some introduction to that topic. What it means is not explaining it, just say, here are a couple of points that are in those readings that are trying to strike me and interesting, okay? Or some questions that come up, that I don't understand. And that's what we can do. We can go around the table doing. Okay, so maybe I should look at this list. Think about that. Think about which topics you find most intriguing, right? And then next time around, I'll just ask what speaks to you most, and then you can take up this baton of saying a few words to kick off the discussion when it comes time to that. Okay, how about that? But I will today, at the end of the day, at the end of our session, I'll say a little bit about the representations. And if you have something else you have a burning interest in presenting, then talk to me. Okay. We'll just make it a little bit. You see, there are only 8 units. We have 15 weeks. So some of these can be put aside, some can be combined, and there was space for introducing new things. Why don't we take a break? What time is it now? It's 5:34. Okay, we can take a break. What I'll propose is, yeah, okay, I'll give you a little case study, a case of what something I'm involved with at Global Futures, which is basically a project for connecting the, I think I mentioned this before, connecting the big Earth systems models that are used by the IPCC, you know, the stand for. Anyway.
International Chemical Energy.
Yeah, IPCC, thank you. So used for modeling the climate, right? So these big models, there's National Science Foundation project that ASU is involved with to connect those models with what people are calling social dynamics models of institutions and nation states, what they would do. So right now they're being written, so they don't quite exist. And the ambition is to connect these two kinds of models with each other. So the output from the Earth systems models will be piped over to these other NORD programs, which will model what the institutions, or in this case, nation states, would do. Like, okay, seed the clouds or reduce carbon output from factories by 50%. And then those outputs would then be fed back into the Earth systems models. So I have some methodological questions about that problems and questions about why people are doing this. I just share with you. That's way to give some concreteness into this. Okay, so why don't we take a 10, 10, how much? Okay, 5 minutes too short, you can get out of the building. Say 10 minutes, you can get out of the building, come back in. All right, so let's say 10-minute break, but I'll be staying in this room. Okay, I'll stay here. And who has card access to this building? Do you guys have card access to it? You do? No. Okay.
Or when does it lock?
Yeah, when does it lock, you know? Last term. Okay, that's why I'm staying in this room.
I think it locks at 5.
Yeah.
Is that, well, if you check
Oh, see, this
that
is red.
number, yeah,
Oh, it's red.
it's red, then it
Okay.
locks at 5, yeah.
How about this? I'll go hang out in the breezeway. So, 10-minute break. Okay, let's go to the breezeway. Okay, and then I'll hang out in the breezeway. It's much nicer. Also, hope it doesn't cause feedback. Okay, let me make a comment to give you some idea of what we mean by. Okay, those of you who like, I think you've been in the mix. Have you all been in the mix center? Okay, so the mix center is a center for it's a giant complex in Mesa, a building that was built for film and emerging media, including immersive spaces. Okay, this workout was done closer on this campus in the synthesis center in the ice stage. I don't know if you've seen the ice stage, but it's like an older version of the black box that we now have a fancy version in Mesa. But basically the idea is it's a theatrical space, as you can tell. So people can all be there in the physical space at the same time. And we built over the years this very flexible infrastructure so that people can write all sorts of real-time processing of video and sound. And I wish you could see this over there, but there's a cameras, microphones, there's wireless things, and everything being processed in real time. Okay. And real time means that as soon as somebody does something, you hear the result, you see the result, you feel the result so quickly with no latency that it's as if it's concurrent. Okay? So it's a very, very strong requirement to make everything palpable and tangible. Okay? So in this particular case, Brandon Metchley was a postdoc. He worked with the INCON, with the National Center for Atmospheric Research for some years, and we managed to make the models, light models, real time. So we're walking across the floor, it's as if we're walking a massive hot air moving across the continent, and then for a massive humidity or massive heat. And so that movement becomes heat, or movement becomes humidity. And also, you can just improvise. In this case, you put a piece of black metal on the floor and interpret it at a certain temperature, like cold. Or wind goes around. The sound is spatial audio, so that we have the wind of speakers, very high quality speakers, so you can do very precise spatialization of the sound. So it creates a sonic field, which is also powerful. So sounds is that you can make it so that you can make sonic objects fly through the air, like birds or whatever, or voices or whatever, or volcanoes. But the thing is that the space itself is malleable acoustically, and in terms of the lighting, you can actually light the floor. In this case, we put underneath it a system that would give people a sense of that's tangible. It's not part of it. So that when we're walking across the floor, it really feels as if you're walking through oil or honey or something tangible like that. Okay, because you fuse the senses. You fuse what you see with what you hear, and you can use subsonics so that it gives a lot of body to the sound. So it's something you feel more than you hear, right? So with low frequencies, you can do that because sound becomes touch at different frequencies. Things like that. So we combine all these different arts of immersive media with somatic arts, with movement arts, and with gestural arts, things like that. In this case, yes, the physics is the physics of weather. So the model itself includes models of humidity, of pressure, the actual physics of it's not just computer graphics or some special effect. It's the physics that the scientists study for the atmosphere. But we put it back into the room so that you become atmosphere, right? So it's a bit of a poetic translation. But we use all sorts of other things. One of my PhD students, Yanjun Liu, is doing a project where it'd be more playful for kids about 8 to 12 years old, and they'll be wearing suits which can, with haptic sensors on them, so they can sort of feel on the body where the other kids and animals, virtual animals are. So you can feel it in the body. And then as they move across the floor, the ocean, so to speak, the projected ocean will open up, and you can see the creatures following you. So they'll be, a bit like a familiar, like in the dark materials, this kind of creatures following you. And when kids interact with each other, meaning they come to each other and face each other, their familiars will also interact with each other. The familiars are protected, the kids are in their body. So it's very, very, very different situation. Okay. Now, this is where I was coming from. And then I was invited to, I won't show it. I was invited to work with this group, not this group, I should say. This is a diagram, not the group. Let's see if we can do this. Okay, so the project I mentioned before the break, sponsored by the National Science Foundation, is a project involving my school of complex, my other school of complex adaptive systems. Oh, am I recording? Oh no. Yes, I am. Good. School of Complex Adaptive Systems with NCAR, in fact, with NOAA, National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, and NCAR. And they're the principals who've been making these gigantic, I guess, pieces of fortran code for decades. And I mentioned before the break that the goal is to connect that up with these social dynamics models. And in the course of this seminar, you'll see probably why I think that's methodologically problematic. To just imagine that we might have a computer model of behavior, even in the very coarsest sense of a nation state, what Ukraine and Russia will do, whatever. But that's the goal. And right now we're building some very coarse, what people in the field call agent-based models. Agent-based models like people using, let's say, artificial life, for example, which model these large social political actors, and each has an agent, a very big agent. And right now we are looking for some insight from sociologists at Duke and some other universities to inform us what a nation state might do in Asia, in Europe, et cetera, in response to certain kinds of climate effects, right? But the actions are specified in advance. Like I said before, they're very coarse actions. Okay, So here's my critique. I gave the presentation, but I won't give you a short one. Okay? The critique, well, the question I was raising was this: we can do this as an academic project, it's a research project. So we have this big set of possible ways that people do this kind of work. Basically, thinking about it as a kind of modeling exercise. We model, whether we model the planet, or we model a nation state, or we model some big organizations, like World Health Organization, let's say. Okay. And then there's different kinds of models. We can say, look, we're building, and we could be saying we're building a model based on trying to build a scientific model, we can build a historical model, we can build a critical theory model, like political analysis, right? But these are all models, okay, of some sort, in argument models are, right? And then say we base it on data of some sort. It could be interviews, it could be text archives, right? It could be different kinds of signals coming up. And I'll share this with you, okay? And there's specific organizations that do this kind of work, including academics in these disciplines. But what if we have a different approach, different attitude, not approach? What if it's not academics who are doing this work, who want this work? What if it's organizations like the Doctors Without Frontiers, or United Nations Development Program, or something, or Amnesty International, or Rockefeller Foundation? Okay, they're not academics; they're informed by research, let's say, but the goal is very different. It's not about making a model of the world, social or natural. It could be that I'm interested in this side over here is to make a change in the world, by enacting. So that's what I mean by enacting. Okay, so and there are different techniques that people do that some of them know a lot more. Examples of. So these are the terms that come from the field, like systems mapping, role playing, allocating capital, people, this kind of stuff. And then more specialized techniques like making sense, what's called sense making in the design field. I'm just giving you a very bird's eye view. Okay, we're not going to specifics right now today. Okay. Or rehearsals, if you talk about futures, so rehearsing future situations before they occur. Okay. But these are very different. So the basic question is, if you talk about making measurements, let's say, the question would be who's making the measurement on whom and for what purpose? It could be a professor of meteorology, right, making some climate model or weather system model, right? And we're measuring, putting buoys out into the ocean, giving telemetry data back, and we get a scientific model you can write up in the paper, which is very different than if you're a fisherman trying to decide if there's going to be fish next year. Was it all fished out? You need to know something about the climate model. And basically, these are really different purposes, really different intentions. And my concern is that we might be in academy, we might be very satisfied with the models we build. We get lots of papers out of it, but the social dynamics models might be very neat. The agent-based models that we write up may actually work. Actually, we can do the engineering, which is what's happening right now, to package up the data from the climate model and put it into the social dynamics model, and then it can close the loop. And we'll write this closed circuit of code, different systems, but that didn't help. People doing this kind of work in the green, not clear. Okay. So there are also big issues too. For example, in the case of the nation states that use the games, they say, well, I think Kim Stanley Robinson, I think, is a science fiction writer who wrote that book recently. Kim Stanley Robinson. The Ministry of the Future. Yeah, the Ministry of the Future, right. They were quoting this book in my research group. And I think it was about, I didn't read it, so something like beginning some catastrophe.
Yeah, there's a heat wave in India.
Yeah.
And well, I forget the number, but I think it kills like a few million people.
Millions, yeah.
Yeah, and then that prompts the whole internet, India specifically, then the international system to like direct way more resources toward climate change, and then they, hence the title of the book, they create something called the Ministry of the Future.
Yeah, but then some nations decide to go it alone. They just unilaterally decide to do something like seed the clouds or something like that. And this is one of the fictional motivations for this kind of social dynamics model. Say, well, what happens if the world doesn't actually all agree to do something in a concerted way? Some nations like India decide to just go ahead and do something like seed the clouds, which may cause drought somewhere else in China. Who knows? Okay, so that's what this big project is about. So what would happen if India decides to go do something that China doesn't like, and it will cause huge perturbations in the climate for China. So this is a scientific model would do something like that. And I said
that's already happening.
which is happening.
Yeah, I mean CO2 with
Yeah.
major polluting countries.
Yeah, and coal burning, for example,
Yeah.
right? So I say, well, and then they say, well, what is the kind of actions? If it's a game, if people talk about making a game out of the situation, say, well, okay, but then what if the players in this kind of gamified version of this thing? We give them a set of actions that they can take, which might be very coarse. I said that's all. But one problem is it's very coarse. Okay, it doesn't really reflect the real dynamics of what causes even nations to do this or that, right? Another is there's what I call background fields. Like this picture, you can't tell in detail, is a set of diagrams I have from a different project looking at the global asymmetries in capital, between capital and capital flow. And I think this particular map is about lining up vulnerability to the effects of climate change regionally, and the readiness to resist those kinds of effects. And they line up very well with another map, which is basically capital flat. Where's capital coming from, where to where. So, and these are like background sources of that can cause can be factors in geopolitical decisions that are not at all discussed or captured in those game models at all. In other words, colonialism, the history of colonialism, it's not captured at all. So these are very fundamental issues that people are not prepared. So what I've been proposing is instead of consulting with these people once in a while to come as informants and then go away and write your game, meaning historians, let's say, or geologists, and you just go interview them and you write out their reports and code them into the game or ignore it. Instead, what if we try to build these systems so that they are in the loop, so that those experts and stakeholders are in the game, they're actually part of the machinery of the game. So instead of having a social dynamic model, bunch of code, right, just replace that by live humans. So we ask them, what would the World Health Organization do in such a situation? What would Bhutan do? What would Nepal do? What would India do? I mean, based on you're an expert in the history of Nepal-China relationships. Okay, based on your experience as a historian, as a public scientist, tell us what you think those agents would do. Okay, because there's a lot more in those embodied knowledge, called embodied knowledge, than anything that actually captured into a piece of code. That's my point. Of course, they might be flawed, right? They might be biased, etc., etc. Sure, yes. But at least they're in the game. They're operating the game. Same thing with theater, right? This happened too, where live actors are part of the machinery of the theater. They actually engage with the audience to perturb the felt experience of the event. Right? So the big challenge that we haven't faced, one big challenge is this. Usually in theater, the actor represents one human being, right? It's not so common to have it one human actor represent, you know, an aggregate, like, you know, World Health Organization or China. What does that mean? That's too big. But, or in infrastructure. See, if we have a human in the loop, where the humans are playing Wizard of Oz, humans are representing the operation of infrastructure, which is our topic for last semester, representing the water system, or the plumbing system, or the vaccination system, right? You see where this is going? So maybe we can find certain people who are experienced in those domains, people who have been working with energy systems for decades, people who work with vaccination programs for decades. They have enough field experience and historical experience and even theoretical knowledge to say, you know, in an informed way, this is what the hospital system would do, right? This is what the shipping system would do if Suez Canal were blocked up. All that kind of embodied knowledge is what I claim. That embodied knowledge is there. It's just not in the code. It's in the people. Not anybody can do it, certain people. What do you think? This is a proposition. What would have to be done to make it more workable? Human in the loop. Yeah.
I have a question. Just to clarify, you mean like when someone is playing the game, they would have a live expert simultaneously, synchronously there with them? Okay.
Like suppose you do like a war game, like in a climate game, you say, well, you know, you need a scientist to stand in for the hurricanes, or you can just write equations. But there we do have a lot of equations. But just something like economy or war, I don't know if we have equations for those. I don't know if we will, and my claim is I don't know if we will ever have equations for this or code. This is my big difference with people doing A-Life and agent-based modeling for social systems. I have to put my cards on the table. Okay, there are theoretical reasons why I believe this was the case. I mean, there are like arguments.
It's essentially that these non-physical, like human, social, technical, or I should say, like more complex systems cannot be either coarse-grained or modeled exactly, that the embodied knowledge built up by people who have interacted with them over decades is a better stand-in than any type of code representation.
This is my proposition.
Right, and then you could have models that include these stakeholders in the loop as a means of projecting futures or
There's some holes in this, okay? One of them is just a stakeholder. Cameron is a stakeholder. And what is stakeholders don't actually know because you can't articulate the situation. You know, if I talk about, you know, someone who works with energy grid, okay, they're an expert. But what if you talk about, I don't know, this in one of our projects was a woman who was a leader in the civil organization representing single women in single mothers in Mexico. So she may or may not have a formal description of the behavior, political behavior of this group of people.
Can you also clarify what kinds of settings these occur in? Like, do they occur in like, I don't like government rooms?
Yeah.
Do they occur online? Do they occur in public spaces? Do they, you know?
Yeah, right now it's in rooms like this, you know, with the decision theater, like.
Right.
This is being recorded, right?
I think-
Actors and, you know, like
Sorry. I think a lot of people who are experts have big gaps in their knowledge as well.
yes, people, that's right, people, even
So-
people who are experts will have big gaps, that's true.
Yeah, and especially when you're talking about like experts who are working in social systems who have very particular ideas about what should be happening. And I'm speaking I mean, you're talking in a scale that I'm, don't have any experience with, but just cities is where I had, I have a little more knowledge. And so people working on homelessness, they have a set of parameters that they work with. And then interacting with those people directly as a person who's done activism, who like has slept out with homeless people and fed them and talked to them and tried to help. There's like a gap there. And so that's what I would be like, what I'm thinking about is, well, it feels like there's a gap when it filters down to the impacts on people's, more broadly, large scale, how does it impact people? Because there's where the reactions are a little bit, they don't react the way that people seem to predict that they will, or the problems would be easier to solve.
A question that comes up right now, which you bookmark, is scale. I think we're both asking questions of scale. And I don't know. I mean, like, I've been thinking scale, meaning maybe at the level of a street or a couple of families is okay. We have people stand in even for or in code decisions, But and maybe in the city, who knows? But I agree. I mean, it may be that if we course grain to such a scale that it loses all definition.
Yeah.
Stuff, can never be realistic.
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay. Or and it may be also true that some behaviors are scale independent. And I don't know the answer. I actually would like to believe that there are some phenomena and some kinds of behavior that are scale independent
In social systems.
in social systems. I'm trying to think of sorry, maybe we should think of just pause. Can you think of an example? Okay, here's an example, maybe, which is having been an administrator, I think, oftentimes in bureaucracies, sometimes in bureaucracies, the people, there's a cascade of authority, and then people at different levels of authority are responsible for what they are taking care of, the chair of the department or a dean or whatever. But it's a different propagation of money. The people who might be responsible for managing a unit, okay, at a certain level of hierarchy, may be responsible, but they may not be responsible for the budget, for the actual money or resources it needs to implement something. Okay, this is the problem. So I think of this as a scale, I can formulate this as a scale independent proposition, which is that locate the resources with the knowledge and with the authority, bundle them together, right? We say, you are responsible for these 25 people in this unit, okay, but also expect that you know what's going on with these 25 people, and I'll resource you to take care of these 25 people's jobs, okay? So in some places work like that, some places don't. And one of my propositions is going to be good management would be that which locates resources with responsibility, with knowledge. I'm sharing with you, I have a few of these rules of thumb that I want to try out with some of these games that we're trying to build for people.
Have you read anything by Herbert Simon?
Yeah, like what are you thinking about?
The Proverbs of Administration.
Perfect. Maybe send the link.
I put it in the Padlet already.
Yay! Oh, I'm gonna share
Yeah,
that.
just now.
Great, Padlet.
It's really cool, and it kind of talks about this whole specialization in terms of management and how it's just way more efficient.
This is
And
it.
it gives like case study examples. Yeah, it's really old, but I read it the other day for another class, and it's funny that it kind of applies perfectly.
Great.
And it's very philosophical, so it'll probably be right up your alley.
So somebody could explain it. Great.
But yeah, that's it's a really cool piece. It had me thinking.
Super. This allows me to transition to perfect to resources for us. Okay, I propose that last term in other courses I use Canvas for discussion threads, things like that. But it's exactly for this kind of purpose that I would like to propose we use Padlet instead of Canvas discussion threads, which are okay, but it's not as free form as this. Plus, I think you all have access to it now as authors, as editors and authors. If you don't, email me. It's pretty simple. Even I can figure this out. So you just print it, post your own. Basically, it's like Pinterest with a few more features. And you can make nice presentations with it. Okay, so I think you can slideshow whatever. And have multi-format, you can put that as a nicely formatted PDF, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so please let's use this as our common room. Okay.
Is it by any chance? I do have a laptop. I left it at a demo. It doesn't seem to work very well on iPad. Is it an app?
I think there's an app. I think there's an app for it. There should be. I've used it in another project, so it seems to be multi-device. If there's a fundamental problem with it, then let me know. Okay. So, so let me just flick through some references since we're here. Okay, in addition to this, I wanted to show you, not this. Here. Nope. Next one. You've seen the mirror already. No. No. Okay. Oh, here we go. Good. Okay. Tanya, can you see this website called I Have a Name? Oh, she dropped out.
No, I'm here. Sorry,
Okay,
I was,
good.
where should I see this?
Here. Am I sharing the screen or sharing?
No,
No.
that stopped at some point.
All right, let me share the whole thing, and I'll finish with this, okay? Because I'll send this out I'll put this into the Padlet. But I wanted to share some things, just some references in the spirit of what I was talking about before. Next, on the 25th, here at ASU, Herberger and some other colleges are sponsoring a film. Unfortunately, conflicts with our class, but it's a film about homeless projects by a very famous architect named Bruce Mau, MAU. I'll send you all those links, okay? It's in Padlet. It'll be screened at ASU ahead of its cinematic release. And Bruce Mau himself will be here with his partner. And they have started with an organization called Massive Change Network. So it's a big deal. I thought of maybe just us going to see it, but I'm not sure it's worth taking all of our class to do that. So you can look at yourself, okay? And just look for Massive Change Network as an organization that Bruce Mau started with his partner. I'm not advocating any of these organizations because I actually don't know. I would like to do some research on these organizations, but I thought it might be interesting to just look at some organizations that are interested in a systemic way thinking about design at the scale. Okay. Another is an organization called Ashoka. Do you know Ashoka? Anybody? Ashoka Foundation is started in the US, but it's a worldwide foundation now, different countries, different regions. It's for what they call social entrepreneurship. Again, I'm curious because if some of you have some time to look into it, I'm actually interested in each case with their politics. I'm interested in like where they're coming from, what their goals really are, you know, how the rhetoric lines up with different kinds of, you know, norms and politics. Ashoka uses this term called social entrepreneurship. It's basically this idea about taking some sort of business practices, but for social good. That's maybe not fair, but that's one way to put it. They have very interesting programs. Like one program they had was for Ashoka Fellows is they take somebody who's actually got already some program that works and for whatever literacy or something like that, and if they can apply to get their salary paid for 1 or 2 years from whatever job they were at, in order to free them up to make that solution work. So it's a very different approach than a regular granting agency. Okay. Another organization is in Sao Paulo, Brazil. It's called SC Pompeia. Very different. It's since after World War II, it was basically a bunch of factories that were in Sao Paulo that were kind of abandoned. And apparently it's very famous. It was kind of squatted for some years by local workers and labor organizations. And then now it's a very vital organization that has thousands of people associated with it, doing everything. They have like craft workshops, art workshops, reskilling workshops for workers, etc. It's a big organization now. So interesting as a kind of alternative community scaffolding exercise that's become very successful. And it also got some architectural awards. Another is, a different kind, is the Mekong River Futures Institute. This is quite interesting because here we sponsored, since this is hosted, people to come to ASU to look at what we call participatory sensing of complex systems. Meaning, it's not just like looking at diagrams on a wall, it's actually being able to palpably feel collectively how the complex system is working, the way that people dancing together can feel the event, okay? But these people were experts in complex systems, and they were looking at, they worked with Cambodia, Vietnam, and Thailand to resolve regional issues with how the waters is used. And so it's a very, and they do systems modeling with these government agencies. In fact, not to make a scientific model of the way things work, but to surface hidden assumptions, prejudices, assumptions, dependencies. So it's very interesting how they use that exercise. And this is the last two I want to show you are from design and art. So Superflux, I think, is one of the most interesting design companies because I think you look at it yourself later. They do things like museum exhibits. They've done film. They've done some here. Let's see, can I show some work here? Workshops, talks, writing, and lots of different formats. Everything's done with a very high production quality. Very sharp, very smart design. But I think what they do is they take basic ideas like indeterminacy or futurist thinking, etc., and they find the form that fits the concept. So if it's about circular economy, let's say, they will find the right form. Should it be an exhibition in a big gallery, or should it be a film? Should it be a game? And because they're very good designers, they're able to actually gather the expertise they need in order to build out the cultural artifact needed to convey the concept. So they're a very smart group. They're based in India, and they've been around for enough years now to become pretty famous. Superflux. And finally, this is more on the art side. There's an amazing artist named Tomás Saraceno, Spanish, who built this amazing project called LC. And basically, it's a poetic project. It's basically how can we fly without using motors or burning any carbon fuel. So, and now they've been able to use passive hot air balloons and lift people off the earth. It's a beautiful project, beautiful project. And he's been exhibited in Venice Biennale.
There's one thing that came to mind when we were talking about scale that might be interesting to read if we're interested in that question. Anna Lowen Tseng has an article on non-scalability where she tries to build out a theory of when things should not be scalable. I read it for a class last year.
Okay.
I thought it's really nice. Yeah, I
so,
can try to post it in this.
or
Yeah,
something.
that'll be my first attempt.
Okay, cool, great, super. So next time, next week, that is, we'll be doing meeting in Zoom. I propose we meet as a group in Zoom, okay? And then because there's stuff probably should gel a little bit more and talk together. So for next time, maybe we can just look at this one piece or talk about this piece. Or you can come and talk about whatever you want to talk about of these three, but I would say the first two. You don't have to read everything, but just read the ones that are most closest to you. So I'll speak a little bit about illusion of control. I'll take that on. maybe others can look at the second one. But delusional control is, in brief, is the following. Sander Vanderbilt was the first dean of school sustainability at ASU. Gary Dirks was like I said before, is the president of British Petroleum China, and he was also brought to ASU by Michael Crows many years ago to be kind of the main guy for mediating between industry perspective and saving the planet. And they have very interesting observations. One of them is how over time societies tend to take categories that initially are very porous, like mammals or something, or four-footed creatures or whatever, democracy, and very porous categories. But over time, those categories might become more and more sharp. So more sharp and limited. And that has the effect of then excluding a lot of the world from those categories. But it gives us the illusion that we know what we're talking about, and we're also in control. And this is the illusion. That's a very quick thing. Okay, Tanya, do you have anything to add to this before we?
Not at this moment.
Okay, this is just like an appetizer. Okay, so I will see you all in Zoom.
Can I ask
Okay.
a logistical
Please.
question? Are the readings on the website or?
Yes, the digital version will have links, and some links are broken. Tell me.
And then, I don't know if I'm the only one who's curious about this kind of thing, but, I think when I originally saw this syllabus, it had some essays on it. And now it just says for discussion. Are we gonna be writing essays?
No, I thought we would discuss, because that's why I want to have done seminar instead of offline. But that's okay. So that means the only writing is at the end. Okay, so but that means really, next time I will not talk so much and I want to hear more. Okay, all right, great.
To read the first, especially.
The first two, especially the first two, and just sort of skim the last one. Okay. All right, Tanya.
I think I do have a question. In terms
Please.
of the Padlet, are there instructions regarding Padlet and interacting on Padlet and how you would like us to do that, what you would like to see?
I want you to think about it now because it's the first time I'm using Padlet. There's a reply function. It's a good question. Okay, there's a reply function so you can reply to any Padlet and add on comments to any Padlet. So in that sense, it's like the Canvas threaded discussion, but
Okay.
because each Padlet can get its own thread, then
It's kind of like a Twitter feed. Seems pretty easy.
well, and Pinterest, between Pinterest and
Pinterest
Twitter.
and Twitter, yeah.
So you can basically gravitate toward a Padlet you find interesting, use that, and just tag onto that one, or add your own.
Okay,
Okay. But for now, just throw in stuff. Okay.
I love it. Thank you.
Great. Okay. See you.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.